All right, you've heard me give this expression a few times. Geography is theology. People remember that? Yep, I hope so. That geography is where things occur. The place is really, really important. Time is important to God, but so is place. Things happen at a particular place in the story, and that place often adds nuance and style and sometimes a little bit of explanation as to what Jesus is actually saying. You've also heard it said, location, location, location. And usually when we hear those three words, we often put them together in things like, business, when you're buying a house, where you're setting up a restaurant, where you're building a road, bridge, or whatever. But, location is incredibly important. And so that's actually what we're going to be looking at in the gospel portion I just read. Because Jesus takes his disciples and he deliberately goes to a place called Caesarea Philippi, as you now know, is conveniently named after Father Phil, 2,000 years before Phil came along, and uh, and he asks one of the most important questions, probably of the whole Bible: Who do you say that I am? Now, he could have asked that of his disciples anywhere, couldn't he? He could have been on the beaches of Tel Aviv, having a Sabbath. And, or he'd gone down to the Dead Sea for a little bit of floating and bobbing in, one of the nature's wonders. And as he was floating, he could have said, "Hey, Pete, who do people say I am, mate?" Okay, because that's the Australian version of the New Testament. So it's true, he could have done these things, but no, we go north to Caesarea Philippi. And what we actually are in the story, within the narrative, the arc of the story arc, where we're actually at the high point. This is it. From here, Jesus is going to set his face towards Jerusalem. We leave the Galilee, leave that all behind. No more Galilee ministry. In fact, in the next couple of gospel passages, he just stops talking to anybody in the Galilee and just teaches his disciples. And he sets his face towards Jerusalem, because coming up is now going to be the showdown with the Jewish leadership, the temple leadership, and everything that's going to occur in Jerusalem, the death and resurrection of the Messiah. So we can probably evaluate the ministry time in the Galilee. Now would probably be a good time. This is that part of the story arc that you see in movies and books, right? In a movie, it takes like an hour and a half when they to journey all the way to the top. You do your thing, and then it takes you 15 minutes to get back to the start again. Have you ever noticed that? Getting back is always faster than getting there. But this is it. This is the high point. So let's analyze the results of Jesus's ministry in the Galilee. What conclusions can we get? What was the point? Jesus healed a lot of people, didn't he? How many of them came to faith? How many of them are going to follow them to Jerusalem? Not many. He's cast out demons from everybody that he's met. He hasn't let one demon alone. How many of them are now avid lovers of the Messiah? One of the things about Jesus, and we should take that to ourselves too, it was never a condition of Jesus's love that you love him back. Isn't that interesting? Right? My son needs healing. Yeah, I'll heal, but you need to become a follower of mine. My son is demon possessed. Yeah, I'll cast out that demon, but you need to follow me to Jerusalem and actually go to Tahiti and be a missionary. Okay, that was never the condition. So what really was the point of all of this in the Galilee then? You did all this wonderful stuff and still hanging out with your 12 disciples. Well, actually, a few more. He's still popular. Not saying that. Jesus is very popular. He's always going to be able to draw a crowd, and they always want to listen to what he's saying. But what is his effect? And maybe that's actually the point. The whole point of his ministry in the Galilee was discipleship. It was we get a chance to see who Jesus is. We get a chance to understand who the Messiah is. Now, notice whenever time someone ever thinks that he's a Messiah or the King of Israel, then Jesus's next reaction is, shh, don't tell anyone. Well, why not? Probably because people have got a real expectation of what they thought a king might be and what they thought a conquering Messiah might be. And so they really struggle with what Jesus is about to say. So Jesus says, don't tell them I'm the Messiah, because they're a little bit confused. I need to show what type of Messiah I am, and I need to show what type of followers I'm after. So his ministry in the Galilee is actually very successful when it is paired with those qualities. Perhaps discipleship really was the point, because those disciples that are with him, they're going to change the world. So Jesus did not fail in his ministry at all. He managed to teach, train, prepare. Yes, they made all kinds of mistakes, but they went out and they changed the world. They were brave enough to do that. So we've actually seen who Jesus is. And now Jesus is going to ask that question, who do people say that I am? But he's going to do it at a very special place. Geography is theology. And so, Alan, can you put up our first slide? Here we are, Caesarea Philippi. I wonder if named conveniently after Father Phil. So what is Caesarea Philippi? Well, it's in the north of the country. It's in what today we call the Golan Heights, or in the book of Genesis, it's called Bashan, and in Deuteronomy, it's called Bashan. This is actually where around these areas you ended up having the giants Og and Sichon that get killed by Moses and the Israelites in battles. They kind of lived around this area. We're quite high up in the north. This is the area is actually the territory of the tribe of Dan. Although Dan originally was not meant to have this territory, he was originally allotted the territory around Tel Aviv. Interestingly, the bus company that you drive around in Tel Aviv, the public buses, are called Dan. That's the name of the company. They've recognized that this is where Dan was, but the book of Judges tells us that Dan couldn't conquer this area, so they moved and migrated up north, and they came here. And there actually is a city conveniently called Dan. How original is that one? And that's actually where we get the word Jordan from, because Yarden means down from Dan. What we're looking at here is actually one of the sources of the tributaries of the River Jordan. The River Jordan actually starts in the north, goes into the Galilee, and then comes out the end. There's two River Jordans, actually. So when you read in the Bible and you hear of Jesus crossed the Jordan, trying to figure out which one is he really doing, it, the southern one or the northern one? And mostly it's the northern one. So Jesus actually would have been familiar with this place. It is only about 40 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles from the Galilee. It's about a day and a half's journey. If you sort of kind of, maybe 2 days because it's all uphill. Caesarea Philippi is a city that was developed by one of the sons of Herod, King Herod, the baby killer, which we see at the beginning of the book of Gospels. He had 3 children, and he conveniently called them all Herod. But to make differentiation, they had middle names. And Herod Philippus, Herod Philip, is the one that ended up having issues with John the Baptist. And he built this city, pagan city, actually, in the north to uh, butter up to his friend Caesar. So you might notice the feature here is that there's this giant big boulder in front of us. Actually, that's actually what is the key feature of Caesarea Philippi. It's this giant boulder. It's in sort of like a little forest around the area. There's waterfalls and all kinds of things. It's a water feature. This, what we're looking at, looks like it has been moved around by water, some huge cataclysmic water event, also known as a flood. And this had become a center of idolatry. So even though Herod is supposed to be Jewish, he had built all kinds of pagan temples up here. And that cavern that we see in front of us, right in the middle, where some tourists are standing, that is a chasm that goes down, and it really descends quite far. And what's down the bottom of it is a spring. What's a spring, I hear you ask? Well, it's a water feature where it's been a crack in the earth due to some seismic shifts. The Golan is actually a volcanic area, lots of volcanoes, all extinct at the moment for now, and it's on a fault line. It's on the where two tectonic plates between Africa and Asia actually intersect, and so they're constantly rubbing, which creates earthquakes and fissures. And these fissures allow water that's been turned into steam by the bowels of the earth to shoot up, and sometimes they come forth in large eruptions, like you sometimes see in Yellowstone National Park in America. But here, it would gurgle and churn and create all the god awful noises. It's horrible, and they actually called this hole the gates of hell. Right? And they said there's something, all of this horrible noises that are constantly gurgling and bubbling up, and it's all horrible. And so we have to appease the demons that live there, and so they would hurl virgins in there. So I don't know why demons like virgins or how this actually helps, but they're babies and animals and goats and you name something, they'll throw anything down there, and nothing stopped the gurgly noises. Nothing stopped the roar of the underworld, and it became known as the gates of hell. It was a very dark place. What is Jesus doing, taking his disciples here? They're around the area. There were Jewish villages. Of course there were. This was the hill territory of Dan. This is a Dan settled. So there were Jewish settlements in that area. They needed to hear the message of Jesus too, apparently. So Jesus and his disciples are there. They're also going to be struck with this pagan environment. Let's go on to the next slide. So here you have a picture of what it kind of looked like from an artist's rendition. There were actually, he only drew in two temples. There were four. Okay, we found four temples that were at the base of this big rock. It was actually a big boulder like Ayers Rock. So there were four gods mentioned. One was to the Greek god Pan. Pan is the Greco-Roman god of nature. He's a satyr. He's half man, half goat. And so the area was actually known as Panias. So Caesarea Philippi, yes, that was the city, but the area around was called Panias, and after Pan. And after the Arabic invasion, it was renamed Banyas, which is actually what it's still called today. Now, why is it called Banyas? Because in Arabic, there is no letter P. So they can't pronounce Panyas. They pronounce Banyas. And that's what we call it today. So there was the god of nature was worshipped here. And then the other, as you sort of moved right, there were other temples. One was to the goddess Nemesis. Okay, vengeance was a female goddess, the wrath of a woman scorned, I guess. And so she was worshipped there, even though vengeance is mine, says the Lord. She was the god here, nature, vengeance, and then if you kept going along, you'd come to the temple to Nymph. Nymph being the goddess of sexuality, infertility, immorality, and full of temple prostitutes and all that stuff. Obviously, big cues to worship the Lord there, and to also a female goddess. And then there was another big temple to Caesar, where man becomes God, because all of the Caesars thought of themselves as actually divine beings or son of the divine beings. And so all the major elements of world religious culture were here: nature, God, man, vengeance, and sex. And it's at this location that Jesus starts asking questions where he says, who do people say that I am? And this is the opportunity for Peter to, open his mouth, and instead of changing feet like normal, he actually gets something right. But first, the disciples answer probably in a way we don't kind of understand. Who do people say that I am? And they answer, well, some people say that you're John the Baptist, because there was this rumor going around that, Herod Philip had chopped off John the Baptist head, and he was dead, but he'd actually been resurrected, and now he was wandering around as Jesus of Nazareth, and he was doing all kinds of things, wonderful power and all that, and he was really going to come down and sort out all the Herods. And there was actually even Herod Philip actually had that fear as well. Well, what about some say Elijah? Because everything that Jesus is doing, he's talking about the kingdom of heaven, his healings, he's opening the eyes of the blind, he's casting out of demons, he's attracting large crowds, and speaking so eloquently and with great wisdom. Then it's lots of messianic expectations. And who's the forerunner of the Messiah? Well, it's Elijah. So maybe he was actually Elijah. And John the Baptist, when he was asked, "Are you the Elijah?" He said, "No, no, no, I'm not." And then Jesus turns around and says, "Actually, yes, you are." And so John the Baptist is the Elijah figure. Jesus is the Messiah. So there's messianic expectation in here as well. And Mark's gospel records them saying, and others said one of the other prophets. In Matthew's version, he actually says Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now, why would people be expecting prophets to come back? And here you have to put the gospels in their historical context, their Hebraic context of the Second Temple period. Most of you know that when you have the Old Testament and the New Testament, or the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Bible, there's often a page in the middle that's blank. Sometimes it's called the silent years, sort of 400 years between Malachi and Matthew, and nothing happened. Well, that is so far from the truth, it's laughable. Lots happened, heaps happened, so much happened, and Jewish people were not silent. They were writing like mad. They were making commentaries and discussions and all kinds of great literature and poetry and psalms and hymns were all being developed in this time. And at the time of Jesus, they did not have a Bible as we understand a Bible. They didn't have it. That comes hundreds of years later. And so there was in these other books, there were books like the Maccabees. What are the Maccabees? Well, this is the story of how the Maccabean freedom fighters got rid of the Seleucid Greeks. And in Second Maccabees, if anybody's read Second Maccabees, there's this encounter where Jeremiah, who's long dead, by the way, because he's in Babylon, during the Babylonian exile, although he actually goes to Egypt, Jeremiah visits Judah Maccabee and brings him a golden sword from heaven, one of the heavenly weapons, and Judah uses that to go forth and slay his Greek opponents. Well, now, who ever heard of someone rising up, and giving their mystical hero a magical sword? King Arthur. Now we know where the Shoresh, where the story comes from. It actually comes from a Jewish source. Who knew? In the Greek version of Daniel, the The book of Daniel that we have in our Bibles is Hebrew and Aramaic. The Greek version, which is in Septuagint, in Latin Vulgate, has more chapters. And one of the stories is where Habakkuk comes and visits Daniel while he's in the lion's den. So there is this tradition of prophets showing up and doing wonderful things. So some people ascribe Jesus and all his power and his teaching. He's one of the prophets that sort of appears that every now and again. So that explains why the gospel writers are recording these crazy answers. So Jesus presses them further. Well, who do you guys say? I know what they say. Even though I've been teaching them and walking around and drawing large crowds, people still got the wrong idea of me. Who do you say? And this is where Peter does his incredible speech. You are the Christ. In Matthew, you get the next bit that says, Son of the living God. But here it's, you're the Messiah. And then he tells people, shh, keep that one quiet. But he got it. In Matthew, you also get, Matthew 16, verse 18, you also get the famous line, upon this rock, I'll build my church. And pick up the commentary or hear a sermon, and they'll all say, well, that's what Peter said. Peter, Petros in Greek, that means rock. And so the Peter's, he's the rock, and Jesus is the rock, but he's the rock, and his saying is the rock, and Jesus is saying, upon this I will build my church. This confession of faith. No, it's location. Jesus, if Jesus had said that in Tel Aviv, yeah, I'd be with you. I'd say, yep, you're right. It's definitely Peter. But at the location, upon this rock, I'll build my church. All the false religions of the world, they're here. But my temple will be built up top. My kingdom beats all the world's kingdoms. It beats your love of nature. It beats your love of sex. It beats your love of vengeance. It beats your love of self-deification. My temple is my kingdom is unstoppable. And just to keep it in theology and geography, the gates of hell will not prevail. You can't stop that gurgling noise. You can't shut this thing up and all that horrible darkness, but I can. I can shut this up, and I will. And that is a very powerful thing that Jesus says. And so on this incredible high, that should be enough of those slides, Alan. On this incredible high, Jesus now begins to teach something he hasn't taught before. The Son of Man, that eschatological character that you find in the book of Daniel, that Jesus has been identifying himself, I am the Son of Man. Okay, he doesn't run around and say, I'm the Son of God. He says, I am the Son of Man. And in Daniel 7, this character that appears in Daniel chapter 7 goes into heaven, stands before God, is given a throne, a kingdom, and everybody worships him. And he lives forever. So this is very strange teaching when Jesus turns around and says the Son of Man has to suffer and he has to be killed and then resurrected. It was a shock. It's like, no. Now they had a theology of suffering. They had been trying to understand the nature of evil and suffering long before Jesus. That's what the book of Job is. The book of Job is 43 chapters on the problem of evil. Okay, and where's it all come from? The books of Maccabees, there are 4 of them. The books of Maccabees all talk about suffering. All these valiant people who went and fought the Greeks, they all died. They died in horrible ways. How could this possibly be the will of the Lord? Well, it gives suffering meaning. In the Maccabees, the suffering ones, the suffering servants, the suffering saints, they brought on the redemption. That caused God to get to act. And of course, there is the idea that the most righteous person would be the Messiah, and so a suffering Messiah would bring on the ultimate redemption. So there was that theology in Jewish tradition, but there was also the kingly aspect, the Messiah who would be king and the conquering king, particularly if you were using the word the Son of Man. So Peter then rebukes Jesus and says, no, you've got that all wrong. And Peter does something that no student should ever do to their rabbi. You never tell your rabbi what to do. Your rabbi tell you what to do. Okay, so here you've got Peter, and he's rightly getting rebuked. Now, we read it here and get behind me, Satan, as though he was possessed by Satan or the devil or something like that. No, Satan just means adversary. What you're saying is adversary. You're against my position. You're against my mission. You're actually trying to stop the kingdom advancing. So don't do that. Get behind me and follow me. Walk after me. Learn to do what I'm doing. And put your mind on the things of God. And then Jesus, to affirm that, said, look, if the Messiah is going to suffer, and I am, then my followers will most likely suffer too. I mean, not everybody, but there's a pretty good chance that following Jesus doesn't mean you always have the best of lives. And here he takes up the image where he says, take up your cross and follow me. Now, to the ears of a first century Jew, if you were picking up your cross, what was going to happen? Why would you be picking up a cross? Because you're on your way to die. It's the only reason you're picking up a cross. It's not like you're the cross seller. I know I might take these to the market and sell a few. That'd be great. If I get in a few before breakfast, I can have Shabbat off. No, if you picked up your cross, you were going to die. And that's pretty bad suffering. But the Messiah was on his way to do just that. But within that suffering, there was meaning. The Jewish people had given suffering meaning. Jesus is giving suffering meaning. And any suffering that we encounter or that we are a part of has meaning. It has value. It has a redemptive quality to it. And that's what he says. You know, what does it profit if you have everything and lose your soul? Don't lose your soul. Suffering, you can even gain it. You can't pay for your soul, but if you give freely, then more is given back. And don't be ashamed. If you're ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you. And we're in a cancel culture, and unfortunately, Father Phil knows what that's like. You know, you say something out of place here, and I'll cancel you, and you're a terrible person. So that's not true. And we shouldn't be ashamed of speaking the truth. We shouldn't be ashamed of doing the truth, ever. In fact, look at what the prophet says in Isaiah 50. I turned my back to my adversary, and I didn't despise the shame, and they plucked out my beard. Now we often read that by saying this is Jesus, although, and I think it is, but in all honesty, that none of the Gospels ever record anybody tearing Jesus's beard out. Okay, we read that back into the Gospels by reading the prophet, and you're allowed to do that, by the way. That's actually good Jewish exegesis. But just in case in point, doesn't actually say it in the Gospels. But here Jesus is being challenging and also giving us an invitation. The invitation is to join in the sufferings of the Messiah and join in his joy, yes, and to acknowledge him before all men and to be unashamed. And that actually is a good thing. There's a reason for everything, and the kingdom of heaven, the part that we're a part of, always prevails. Nothing stops it. Nothing has been able to stop the gospel leaving Jerusalem and going around the world. Nothing. And nothing will stop Jesus building his kingdom on top of that rock, and all other kingdoms will be under his feet. And that actually is really good news. So, shalom, and see you soon.